The shuttle hissed as it landed on the cracked salt flats of Afari Prime, a desert world orbiting a dim orange sun. The sky was the color of rust, and the wind carried a dry, electric sting. Sand flowed like water across the dunes, constantly reshaping the land. From the open ramp, a dozen alien students disembarked, blinking various eyes and adjusting their hydration suits. Each had trained for this, the Interstellar Desert Marathon, an endurance race spanning 200 kilometers through some of the harshest terrain known to the Galactic Exchange Program. Gerren Blake stepped down last, the only human among them. He adjusted the straps on his pack and pulled a cloth wrap over his nose. His boots crunched on the baked crust of the surface as he walked forward. A tall, angular alien with a translucent thorax and long limbs approached him with something that might have been a clipboard. "Gerren Blake," the alien asked, its voice oddly rhythmic. "Yeah," Gerren squinted toward the horizon. "This where we start, indeed. You are the only human participant. Your species has no prior record of successful completion." "Well, there's a first time for everything." The alien peered at him. "Please refrain from dying. It complicates the paperwork." Gerren grinned beneath his scarf and stepped into the line with the others. The starting beacon lit up with a low hum, and as the countdown began, he shook out his arms and bounced lightly on his feet. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he had a stubborn streak that had gotten him through worse things than sand and heat. "3," the beacon said. The alien beside him, short, round-bodied, with fluid-filled feet, slurped up a hydration gel and made a gurgling sound that might have been a burp. 2. A taller one, with fronds for a face and a low center of gravity, crouched like it was going to leap instead of run. 1. The beacon burst into a sharp tone and the line of students surged forward. For the first few kilometers, the sand was firm and the terrain relatively flat. Gerren kept his pace steady, watching the others. The frond-faced one bounded ahead, using long, sweeping leaps. The round-bodied one slid along like a slug on rollerblades. Gerren jogged, letting his breathing settle, sweating more than he liked but not dangerously yet. By kilometer 20, the sun was high and the heat bore down like an anvil. Gerren's canteen was half empty. He stopped by a checkpoint marker, a squat metal pole with a blinking light, and checked his vitals on the wrist monitor. Heart rate was high but steady, hydration low. He pressed his thumb to the beacon to log his time and looked around. The others were scattered across the dunes. A spindly, four-legged alien with a spiraled neck was collapsed near a rock outcropping, panting through its skin vents. Gerren jogged over and knelt beside it. "You all right?" The alien blinked slowly. 2, dry. Gerren shook his canteen. Half a cup. He hesitated, then held it out. "Sip slow." The alien looked at him, then took the canteen with trembling appendages and drank. "Better?" Gerren asked. The alien nodded faintly. "You gave your water. You needed it." The alien looked at him like he'd just sprouted wings. After helping the alien shade itself under a rock overhang, Gerren continued on. His mouth was dry now too, tongue sticking to his teeth. He scanned the horizon and spotted a black ridge in the distance. Maybe volcanic rock, maybe shade. At kilometer 35, he hit it. Jagged black stones jutted out of the sand like broken bones. He tucked himself into the shadow of one and let his body cool. His water was gone. He checked his monitor again. Hydration, critical, heart rate, high. He exhaled slowly and looked at the stone. It was smooth on one side, like it had been worn by water ages ago. That meant ancient riverbeds. He looked down at the sand and started scratching at the surface with a multi-tool. The sand gave way to a harder layer. He kept digging. An hour passed. Then, too, his hands blistered. He pulled off his gloves and kept going. Then, a patch of dark soil. He shoved the tool in and twisted. It came back damp. He sat back, breathing hard. He couldn't drink the mud, but he could build something. He pulled his emergency foil tarp from his pack and dug a wider hole. Lining it with the tarp, he piled stones around the edge to keep the shape. Then he dug a smaller hole nearby and connected them with a shallow trench, condensation. He remembered a survival manual he read years ago. Evaporation from the wet soil would collect on the tarp and drip into the catchment. It was slow, but it would work. He lay back in the shade, eyes closed, body aching. He didn't know how many of the others had made it this far. By nightfall, he had a palm's worth of water. Not much, but enough to keep him going. He drank in small sips, then refilled the catchment. The next morning, he woke to murmurs. Alien murmurs. A group of them had found him. The four-legged one he'd helped earlier was among them. It pointed to the water catch. You made this. Yeah. Not much, but it's better than nothing. The frond-faced alien crouched over it, sniffed the water, then sipped. It is cool, it said, surprised. Condensation takes time but keeps you alive. One of the others, a tall, blue-skinned being with glowing joints, looked around and sat down. We will rest here, you have created an oasis. Gerren looked at the pit. It was a hole in the ground with some foil and muddy water, but to them it was miraculous. The next day others arrived. Some limped. One had heat blisters along its side. Gerren used the foil tarp and dug more catchments. He rationed the water strictly. They took turns drinking. The aliens began calling it the human spring. By day 4, Gerren's hands were raw, fingernails cracked, but the oasis had grown. He'd found other damp spots nearby. The aliens helped dig now, bringing fragments of tarp and tools from their own kits. By day 6, the organizers finally arrived via hovercraft. The beacon had gone quiet for 2 days, and they feared fatalities. What they found was a camp of exhausted but alive students gathered under makeshift shelters, with Gerren asleep in the sand, a half-finished trench beside him. The alien official looked around, stunned. You survived. Gerren blinked slowly, then sat up. Didn't have much choice. You created a viable hydration site in open desert. Wasn't just me. They helped. The spiral-necked alien stepped forward. He gave me water when he had none to spare. The official nodded slowly. You are disqualified for leaving the marathon route. But your survival has redefined the challenge. Gerren laughed once, dry. Great, can I get a ride back now? You will be taken to the med station. Your vitals are unstable. No kidding. 2 days later, his hands were bandaged and the swelling in his feet had started to go down. The doctor said he had mild dehydration-induced kidney stress but would recover fully with rest and fluids. Several of the aliens came to visit him. The frond-faced one brought a small, carved rock with a symbol etched into it. For the human spring, it said. Gerren smiled. Thanks. You are. Strange, but useful, he nodded. That's about right. The Galactic Exchange reevaluated the marathon parameters. They added a new survival module based on Gerren's trench and tarp setup. The desert was still lethal, but now it came with instructions, and the aliens, they told stories. Not of victory, but of the time a human dug a hole and made it rain under the sun. 3 days after being evacuated from the flats, Gerren sat upright on the edge of a cot in the mobile med unit, forcing a dry ration bar down with warm electrolyte broth. The place smelled like warmed plastic and citrus disinfectant. A low hum came from the cooling vents overhead, barely masking the soft rustle of movement at the far end where a reptilian med tech was adjusting nutrient bags for a patient with gill slits along its ribs. Gerren's hands were wrapped, but he could move his fingers now. Scabs lined his knuckles where the blisters had split and peeled. His feet were propped on a low stool, both still swollen, the skin around his toenails having turned an unpromising shade of grayish pink. He flexed his toes gingerly. The pain was sharp, but at least it didn't pulse anymore. The flap to the unit hissed open. The first to duck inside was the tall, bioluminescent alien with joint glows like lanterns, Zale, if Gerren remembered right. Behind Zale came 2 others, one with ridged plates down its back like a living suit of armor, and the other small and hunched, translucent skin revealing delicate internal sacs that expanded and contracted in a slow rhythm. Zale tilted its head. You are upright. Yeah. Don't tell the nurses, Gerren said, setting the empty broth cup on the floor with his heel. They'll strap me down again. The plated one clicked its mandibles. You are not to be discharged. Nope, just stretching. The translucent one stared at the stool. Your feet are in a state of distress. That's a polite way to put it. Zale stepped closer. We reviewed the footage. Gerren raised a brow. Footage? From the satellite drones. They monitor for heat signatures. Your digging was visible from orbit. Is that so? Gerren leaned back a bit. I thought I was alone that whole time. You were, Zale said. But we watched afterward. None of us considered that sand could be manipulated. The plated one crouched beside the cot. We assumed death would arrive swiftly. Your behavior was interpreted as a form of ritual madness. Gerren snorted, not far off. The translucent one pressed a small device against its ribs. A light blinked and it spoke again, voice subtly shifted. We have questions. Shoot. Zale sat on an overturned supply crate. Why didn't you conserve your energy instead of expending it? I needed water. Sitting around hoping for rain didn't seem like a solid plan. The plated one tilted its head, but you had no certainty it would work. I rarely do, Gerren said. Same reason I've tried growing tomatoes in a closet. Sometimes you just try stuff. Sometimes it works. Zale tapped its fingers on its thigh. You altered the conditions of the environment instead of submitting to them. That's just Tuesday for us. The translucent one blinked slowly. Your resilience exceeds projections. Our educational models require revision. Glad to throw off the curve. Zale stood. We wish to replicate your water system. Will you assist? I'm not moving much for the next few days, Gerren said, pointing to his feet. But I can draw you a diagram. Your language is inefficient for technical schematics. We've got pictures. The plated one looked at the bandages on Gerren's hands. You injured yourself for others. I figured at worst I'd die sore but useful. Zale nodded once. This concept, dying usefully, is not standard among us. Yeah, we're big fans of unreasonable sacrifice. Gets us in trouble sometimes. Hours later, after they'd gone, the nurse, a squat amphibious creature with flipper arms and a permanent expression of disapproval, came in and scolded Gerren for being upright longer than the chart allowed. That evening, a med tech wheeled in a projection pad and set it up next to his cot. Gerren spent the next hour sketching out the trench and tarp setup using a stylus and his non-dominant hand. He had to keep stopping to rest his wrist. The med tech watched in silence, occasionally leaning in to ask him to redraw a section or clarify angles. When he finished, the tech nodded. This is replicable. Try it near the basalt ridges. Soil's better there. We will adjust the training modules accordingly. The next morning at dawn, a delegation arrived. Gerren was still groggy from a sedative patch when they entered 3 aliens in robes that shimmered like oil slicks, each with an attendant holding a folded data screen. One of them stepped forward, its face a smooth oval with no features except a slit for a mouth. We are from the exchange board. Fantastic, Gerren muttered, trying to sit up straighter. I assume you're not bringing breakfast. You altered the outcome of a standardized trial. Technically, I dropped out to avoid death. You redefined the parameters. This is a violation and a contribution. Can it be both? We seek clarification. Was your behavior planned? Nope, strategic. Barely. The second robed figure adjusted its sash. Then what motivated you? Maybe I didn't want to be the guy who let the desert win. The third leaned forward. This is not a transferable motivation. Welcome to humanity, they huddled. Gerren watched them murmur in their own frequencies, their robes shifting color with every new emotion. After a minute, they turned back to him. We will request a new classification be created. For what? Human improvisational survivalism. That's a mouthful. It will be abbreviated. Of course it will. Later that day, he was allowed outside for supervised movement. With his arms around a rail cart, he limped awkwardly across the station's shaded courtyard. The floor was padded and windbreak walls kept the dust out. A few other students were there, some training, others convalescing. Zale was among them, standing beside a squat, barrel-shaped being with multiple eyes arranged in a spiral. Zale approached. We wish to test your methods. In what way? The spiral-eyed one handed Gerren a folded sheet of synthetic tarp. We replicated your materials. You're gonna try it here. Gerren raised an eyebrow. There's no soil. This is a simulation chamber. They guided him into a low room with a domed ceiling and red lights. The air was hotter. Sand had been trucked in and raked into a shallow basin. Gerren knelt slowly, hands still stiff, and showed them how to dig the evaporation pit, how to create the slope, how to weight the tarp with stones. The spiral-eyed one blinked rapidly. You use gravity passively. It's free. They ran the simulation for 5 hours. Condensation began forming after 2. The barrel being made a delighted chirping noise when the first droplet slid into the catch basin. Zale recorded everything. The next day, word spread. Not just among the students, but among the staff. Gerren was approached by a tall official with 4 arms and a sash trailing behind it like a comet tail. "You are authorized to run a seminar. I haven't even finished physical therapy. We will provide a stool." The seminar, held in the main hall of the exchange outpost, drew more attendees than expected. They filled the benches, stood in aisles, perched on ceiling supports. Gerren sat on a stool with his foot up on a crate, diagrams behind him, and explained how to keep yourself alive when the universe didn't want you to be. Afterward, a small, furry alien with spindly hands approached, holding up a pad. "What is the name of this technique?" Gerren thought for a moment. "Panic engineering." The alien nodded solemnly and wrote it down. 2 days later, he was cleared to walk unassisted. The swelling in his feet had gone down enough that he could fit into a pair of soft boots. His gait was uneven, but improving. On the way to the mess hall, he passed a training yard where a group of students practiced trench digging in a sand pit. They worked in pairs, adjusting foil tarps, pouring small amounts of water to test the catch basins. One of them saw him and waved a gloved hand. Gerren raised a hand in return, then kept walking. By the time he got to the mess, the cook, a 6-limbed being with an apron made of old signage, handed him a tray with double rations and an extra hydration pouch. "No charge," it croaked. He sat at the end of a long table where a few others gave him nods as he passed. No one asked him to retell the story. It had already become something larger than him. As he ate, a message arrived on his comm pad. It was from Earth Command's liaison officer. Subject: Observation report request. Please explain the following quote attributed to you. "I didn't want to be the guy who let the desert win." Gerren read it twice, then set the pad down and took another bite of his protein loaf. He'd answer later. The desert hadn't won. That was enough for today. The synthetic sand scraped loudly beneath Gerren's boots as he stepped into the training dome again, this time without assistance. The artificial light overhead mimicked Afari Prime's dull orange sun, but with half the radiation and none of the searing heat. Still, it was enough to bring a sting of sweat to his brow within minutes. 3 students were already inside. The spiral-eyed creature was shaping a trench with a tool resembling a curved rake. Zale stood nearby, observing while holding a datapad that flickered with multiple diagrams. A third student, one Gerren hadn't seen before, had a long, segmented body with 6 arms and a face that looked like it had been borrowed from a startled owl. "You're late," Zale said without looking up. "I had to get clearance from the med staff." "They still think I should be horizontal," Gerren replied, pulling a folded tarp from under his arm and dropping it beside the trench. "But I told them I was consulting, not laboring. You are perspiring already." "That's not labor. That's just me walking." The owl-faced alien clacked its mandibles together with a sound like dry twigs snapping. "Your species generates fluid under stress. Yeah, it's how we stop from cooking ourselves. Not elegant, but it works." Zale gestured to the trench. "They are attempting to replicate the triple basin layout." Gerren crouched beside it. The soil was too loose. He ran his fingers through it and frowned. "You're not compacting the channel walls. Water's going to bleed out into the sand." The spiral-eyed one turned its head in a full rotation. "We used your depth ratios. Doesn't matter if the walls collapse. Watch." He scooped a small handful of sand and pressed it into the side of the trench, then tapped it with his knuckles until it held its shape. "You've got to pack it as you go, layer by layer. Otherwise, it's just a hole with false hope." Zale updated the diagram on the datapad silently. The owl-faced one leaned closer. "Why 3 basins? Redundancy. 1 catches, 1 stores, 1 filters if you get lucky. If one fails, you've still got backup. But you only used 1 during your survival. I didn't have time for luxury back then. Now we can get fancy." The spiral-eyed one began adjusting the trench accordingly, muttering in its native tongue as it pressed the walls into place. Gerren stood slowly, stretching his back. It cracked in 3 places. "I'm gonna regret that later." "You are not yet recovered," Zale said. Nope, but I've got cabin fever and watching interns misdig my legacy is worse than a limp. Zale tilted its head. You consider this your legacy, not proud of much else, he said. I once tried to microwave a can of beans. Owl face blinked both sets of eyelids. Is that dangerous? Only if you like your eyebrows. An hour passed. The basin was completed, the tarp laid, and water simulated through a low-pressure vapor emitter. Condensation formed within 40 minutes. The spiral-eyed student chirped once, then twice, as it collected the droplets in a vial. It is functioning. Gerren nodded. Don't forget to test runoff. If it floods, you've built a puddle, not a system. Zale held up the datapad. We can generate a runoff simulation. Your input will be included in the next module release. Glad to be a footnote. You are a primary source. That's worse. Outside the dome, afternoon light filtered through the translucent roof panels. The desert beyond was stark and still. Gerren opened the dome hatch and stepped outside for a moment, breathing in air that still held the faint tang of sterilized minerals. A low whistle echoed across the flats. He turned to see a transport skimming across the sand, raising a thin trail of dust. It slowed as it neared the dome, settling with a gentle thud. The hatch hissed open and a lanky humanoid in a diplomatic field uniform stepped out, carrying a cylindrical case. You Gerren Blake, depends who's asking, station liaison. I've got something for you. Official delivery from the Exchange Council. Gerren raised an eyebrow. Am I being sued? The liaison ignored that and opened the case, revealing a polished metal plaque with inscriptions in 4 languages, including English. It read, in recognition of adaptive survival under extreme conditions. Gerren Blake, human representative. The liaison handed it to him. They're naming the revised training module after you. Blake Method, Applied Desert Improvisation. It's being added to the survival curriculum across all Tier 3 hazard planets. Gerren stared at the plaque, then looked up. I was hoping for a fruit basket. There's also a meal voucher. One-time use, valid at any exchange mess within 2 parsecs. Now we're talking. The liaison stepped back toward the transport. Your presence is no longer mandatory on Afari Prime. You're cleared for return transit. Gerren ran a hand through his hair. Yeah. I figured. The transport lifted off, leaving him standing with a plaque tucked under one arm and dust swirling around his boots. Inside the dome, the others were still working. Zale had set up a second trench. Owlface was now experimenting with windbreak placement using small reflective shields. Spiral Eyes was adjusting the basin angles with obsessive precision. Gerren stepped back in and leaned against the doorframe. They're gonna be fine. Zale didn't look up. The new students arrive in 3 days. We will instruct them using your methods. Don't forget to tell them to trust their stupid ideas. Sometimes those are the ones that save you. We are compiling a list of irrational human actions that yielded positive outcomes. It is currently 37 entries long. Only 37, we excluded culinary improvisations. Cowards. Owlface approached him. Will you depart now, soon? You do not wish to oversee the next group. Gerren looked at the half-finished trenches, the scatter of tools, the quiet determination in their movements. He shook his head. Nah, it's better if they figure it out themselves. That's kind of the point. Zale stepped forward. You dismantled a tradition not with defiance but by accident. I do my best work on accident. You have changed the parameters of expectation. Good. Maybe next time they'll send someone who packs a shovel. He turned and stepped back outside. The wind was light, and the sky was starting to shift toward a cooler mauve near the horizon. His feet still ached, and his hands would probably never enjoy sand again, but his steps were steady. He walked past the med station, nodded to the nurse through the window, and headed for the far edge of the outpost where the student housing domes sat in loose clusters. A small group of trainees passed him, chatting in multiple dialects, some still blinking against the light. They made space for him without prompting one of them. A short amphibious being with a pack nearly its own size gave him a quick salute with 2 fingers. You're the water guy. Gerren nodded. I guess I am. They moved on, and he kept walking until he reached the edge of the compound. The last dome shimmered in the low sun, and beyond it, the desert stretched on, vast and uncaring. He stood there a while, the plaque still under his arm, and watched as the wind shifted the dunes grain by grain. The desert would always win eventually. But it could be outlasted, outwitted, even outworked if only for a little while. That was enough. He turned around, heading back toward the mess hall. The voucher still had to be spent.